It was still dark outside when Marta Johnson woke up, not to an alarm clock, but to the quiet ache in her bones. The old heater in her tiny two-bedroom apartment rattled like it was dying. The kitchen light flickered as she brewed her single cup of coffee, careful to save the last spoonfuls of sugar for her grandson's cereal. Marta was a 62-year-old African-American woman, tall and proud despite her worn-out sneakers and tired back. She lived in one of the poorest parts of the city, in a housing block where sirens were more common than birdsong. But inside her home, everything was clean, warm, and full of quiet grace. She placed a packed lunch on the counter for her daughter, a nurse who worked night shifts, and kissed her sleeping grandson's forehead. He stirred in bed, mumbling, "Love you, Nana." Her lips trembled. "Love you more, baby." At the bus stop, Marta stood with her arms crossed against the cold, her work bag hanging from one shoulder. Inside it, her worn gloves, a Bible with frayed edges, and a lunch she rarely ate all of, just in case someone else needed it more. She didn't complain when the bus was late. She didn't grumble when the driver barely acknowledged her. That was life, and Marta had learned long ago that dignity wasn't about what life gave you. It was how you walked through it. When she arrived at the gleaming glass skyscraper, the building almost seemed to resist her presence. The revolving doors turned slower for her. The guards barely nodded. She changed into her blue janitor's uniform in a tiny basement locker room with flickering lights. A note on the wall read, "Smile, you're lucky to be here." She smiled anyway, but not because of the sign. She smiled because gratitude was her armor. Marta didn't just clean, she noticed. She picked up the coffee cup an intern dropped and forgot, placed a fresh tissue in the ladies' room when no one else would have bothered. She left encouraging Bible verses scribbled on tiny pieces of paper, tucked beneath keyboards or behind bathroom mirrors. "Be not weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap." No one knew it was her. She didn't need them to. In the break room, she overheard two young assistants laughing. "Why's she always humming hymns like she's in church?" "'Cause she probably is. Look at her. She probably prays the floor's clean." Marta just smiled softly and kept wiping the counter. "God sees," she thought. "That's enough." She sent money home every Friday to her sick sister in Alabama, cooked soup for the widowed neighbor upstairs, volunteered at a church shelter twice a week, always showing up with a hot meal, even if it meant less food for herself. But behind her kindness was quiet strength. Last winter, a supervisor had cursed at another cleaner, a young man who barely spoke English. Marta stood between them. "No one here deserves to be spoken to like that," she said, firm and unshaken. The room went quiet. The supervisor backed off. The young man's eyes filled with tears. Marta simply nodded and handed him a warm scarf she'd knitted herself. That night, Marta sat at her kitchen table with a candle lit. Not because it was for ambiance, because the electricity was out again. Still, she gave thanks. "Lord," she whispered, "I have enough. I am enough. Let me keep being light in dark places." In a corner office 40 stories above the street, where sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows and the carpets were softer than most people's beds, sat Victor Langston, the man who thought he owned the city. Tall, silver-haired, and immaculately dressed in a tailored Italian suit, Victor exuded power like cheap cologne. His desk was sleek and empty. Just a silver pen, a black notebook, and a nameplate that read, "Victor Langston, CEO." He liked things clean, controlled, and beneath him, especially the people. That morning, Victor had his executive assistant cancel a scholarship program the company sponsored in a low-income neighborhood. "They don't need college," he said while sipping his imported espresso. "They need to learn how to sweep floors properly, if they're lucky." The assistant didn't say a word. No one ever did, not to Victor Langston. Later in a board meeting, a junior executive brought up the issue of warehouse safety. Workers had been getting sick from poor ventilation. Victor leaned back in his leather chair and gave a short, cold laugh. "We're not paying for air," he said. "They breathe for free, don't they?" The room went quiet. Then he added, "Next time they want fresh air, tell them to get promoted." He didn't hold the elevator for anyone. If someone tried to speak to him in the lobby, he looked past them like they were part of the wall. When a janitor accidentally crossed his path in the hallway, a woman carrying a mop bucket, Victor paused, looked her up and down with disgust and muttered, "This is what happens when the gatekeepers fall asleep." He didn't say excuse me. He didn't even look her in the eye. That same afternoon, he hosted a company luncheon. Champagne, caviar, and steak flown in from overseas. None of the building staff were invited. But when one of the younger interns asked if they could bring leftover food to the janitors, Victor scoffed. Number, if you feed them like people, they start thinking they are. The words hung in the air like a slap. Victor believed his money made him untouchable, above feelings, above ethics, above everyone. "I earn this," he often said. "If you're poor, it's because you deserve to be." Back in his office, he stood by the window, sipping $1,000 whiskey, watching the city lights come alive below. Down there, people were rushing home on crowded buses, juggling second jobs, scraping by. He smirked. "They built the ladder. I climbed it. That's the deal." The grand ballroom of Langston Enterprises glowed with chandeliers the size of small cars. Gold-trimmed drapes, marble floors, and the soft hum of a jazz quartet created the illusion of grace, class, and power. The annual holiday gala was less about celebration and more about hierarchy, a parade of status, where every glance, every handshake was a reminder of who ruled and who served. Victor Langston made his entrance like a king surveying his domain. Flanked by executives and admirers, he moved through the room with the confidence of a man who believed nothing and no one could touch him. He laughed loudly, talked over people, and never looked at a single staff member directly. In the back corner, near the kitchen doors, stood Marta. Dressed in her faded uniform, hair tucked under a plain cap, she quietly wiped a serving tray and tried to remain invisible. It was a night shift she had taken voluntarily, hoping for some extra holiday pay. Money was tight. Her grandson needed winter boots. Despite the noise and sparkle, Marta moved with the same grace and dignity she carried into every space. She smiled kindly at waiters, nodded to dishwashers. Her presence didn't match the elegance of the gala, but her soul carried a quiet nobility that no chandelier could outshine. At one point, Victor raised his glass of deep red wine for a toast. His voice echoed across the room. "To power and to those smart enough to take it." The crowd laughed, half out of amusement, half out of fear. Then with a lazy flick of his wrist, he poured the rest of the wine directly onto the polished marble floor, right at Marta's feet. A gasp rippled through the crowd, but it was swallowed quickly by uncomfortable laughter. No one said a word, not one executive, not one guest. Victor looked directly at Marta for the first time all evening. "Looks like there's a spill," he said with a smirk, then turned to his companions. "Let's hope she knows how to use a mop." Marta stood frozen for a second. The thick red stain was spreading slowly across the marble like blood. Her hands tightened around the cleaning cloth, but her face stayed calm. She bent down without a word and began to clean. Her heart pounded, not from shame, but from a deep sadness. Not for herself, but for the room full of people who saw what happened and said nothing. She felt invisible, humiliated, but not defeated. Every motion she made, wiping the wine, scrubbing the floor, was filled with a silent strength. Inside, she whispered a prayer her grandmother once taught her. "Let me walk in grace where others walk in pride." As she cleaned, she felt the eyes on her. Some pitied her. Others avoided her gaze entirely. But no one offered help. No one said, "That was wrong," because Victor Langston owned the room, and no one dared challenge him. But Marta wasn't afraid. Not really. She wasn't ashamed of who she was. She was ashamed of them. That night, as she walked home under cold streetlights, the sound of jazz still echoing in her ears, Marta made herself a quiet promise. "Next time, I won't just wipe it up." The next morning, whispers about the gala circulated through the halls of Langston Enterprises, but no one spoke of the wine, the floor, or the woman who cleaned it. No one dared, except one. Eli, a young intern fresh out of college, had stood in the crowd the night before, frozen. He had watched Marta kneel with quiet dignity as Victor Langston mocked her, and he had done nothing. It haunted him. Later that week, During a midday staff luncheon in the executive lounge, Marta was called in to clean up a broken dish. It wasn't part of her normal duties, but someone had summoned her anyway, on purpose. Victor Langston was there, lounging in his leather chair, swirling a glass of wine, amused. As Marta knelt down again with her cloth, Eli couldn't stay silent. He stepped forward, voice shaking slightly but clear. "Sir, that wasn't right. What happened at the gala?" The room grew cold. Executives stopped chewing. Victor blinked slowly, then smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Is that so?" he said, standing. "Well, thank you, philosopher intern. Since you seem so concerned." He walked over, stood beside Marta, who paused, her hands trembling, unsure of what was about to happen. Then Victor pointed at the rag in her hand. "Why don't you wipe it then? Be useful." A silence fell so hard it rang. Eli hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest. He felt everyone's eyes on him, amused, judgmental, dismissive. His throat burned with shame. But then he saw Marta's eyes, not angry, not disappointed, just tired. So Eli took the rag. He knelt down next to her. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. But not for long. Victor, watching with a smirk, raised his glass again and deliberately tipped it over, spilling deep red wine across the freshly cleaned floor. "Oh dear," he said dryly. "Looks like she missed a spot." Marta stood up slowly, hands clenched. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The humiliation in the room was thick, not just hers now, but Eli's too. His face flushed deep red, eyes downcast, tears stinging, not just from embarrassment, but from fury. He wasn't just humiliated. He was made small, put in his place. Victor turned away, chuckling to himself, returning to his conversation with board members like nothing had happened. Some of the executives glanced at each other nervously. A few looked away. A few looked at Marta with something like regret, but none spoke. Marta, holding the rag, stood taller than anyone in the room. She looked at Eli, gently took the cloth from his hand, and nodded once. "You don't belong on your knees," she whispered, "but thank you for trying." And then she cleaned the wine again, not for Victor, not for the company, but for herself. And this time she didn't pray. She planned. The tension at Langston Enterprises had become a living thing. After the wine incident, whispers about Victor's cruelty spread like wildfire. Quietly behind closed doors, passed in glances and nods. But still, no one dared confront him, except Marta. It was a Friday. The boardroom was filled with top executives, assistants, and catering staff. A high-stakes investor meeting was underway, the kind of day where no one breathed wrong. Marta had been called in again, not for cleaning, but to serve drinks. That wasn't her job, but they knew she wouldn't say no. She moved through the room silently, professionally, her every step measured. She placed coffee and water without eye contact. Not with Victor, not anymore. But he was watching. As she turned to leave, Victor's voice cut through the room, loud, purposeful, cruel. "Marta," he said, holding up a linen napkin between two fingers, as if it were diseased. "You forgot this." She turned. The entire room turned with her. He dropped the napkin at her feet. The silence was deafening. Marta looked down at the napkin, then up at Victor. His smile was wide, smug, like a man who believed the world owed him its knees. She bent down, picked it up, paused, then she stood. She stepped forward, quiet and calm, and with every step the room froze. Without warning, Marta raised her hand and slapped Victor Langston across the face. A crisp, clean strike. Gasps erupted from every corner of the room. Glasses clinked. A phone dropped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Victor staggered back half a step, shock written across his reddening cheek. Marta didn't flinch. Her voice when she spoke was steady, deep, and final. "That's from the people who clean your messes, Mr. Langston. The ones you don't see, the ones you think are beneath you. You have power, but you have no honor." She turned away. Victor's lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. Victor Langston's cheek still burned, but what burned more was his pride. In front of his board, his staff, his world, He'd been slapped by a woman he considered invisible. His hands curled into fists. His face turned deep red. A storm surged in his chest. Not of shame, not of guilt, but of rage. Marta was already halfway down the hallway, her figure calm and composed, walking toward the exit. Victor snapped. He shoved past the table. His chair toppled over. A glass shattered underfoot. Gasps followed him. People moved out of his way. He was breathing hard now, fast, like a man possessed. Just as Marta reached the double doors, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned slowly. Victor was coming straight at her, furious, trembling, like he might actually raise a hand. But then, a shadow stepped between them. The young intern, James, barely 22, quiet, nervous, but now standing tall, directly in Victor's path. "Move!" Victor's voice was cold, but James didn't move. His voice was soft but clear. "You're not touching her." Victor's nostrils flared. "Do you know who I am?" James met his gaze, his body shaking, but his eyes steady. "I do, but today, everyone just saw who she is." Victor hesitated. Marta looked at James, a softness in her eyes, gratitude, but also sorrow, for what this moment cost him. Then she turned to Victor and said firmly, without raising her voice, "You've spent your life stepping on people to climb higher, but every step leaves a soul behind. One day, Mr. Langston, you'll reach the top, and there will be no one left to catch you when you fall." The hallway was full now. Staff, executives, even senior partners. No one spoke. They weren't on Victor's side anymore. Their eyes were on Marta, and every gaze that once feared Victor now judged him. He stood there, breathing heavily, fists still clenched. But something had shifted. He looked around. He was powerful, but suddenly he was alone. Marta nodded gently to James, then walked out the door, into the winter air, into the unknown. But now the whole world was watching.